This is America.
The concept of race is a relatively recent development.
Initially, blacks brought to this country were not enslaved, but as plantation farming expanded, demand increased greatly for both labor and land.
The growing demand for labor on plantations was met through slavery.
As the system of bond labor had been thoroughly transformed into a racial caste system predicted on slavery.
The degraded status of Africans are justified on the ground that Negroes were an uncivilized lesser race.
Former slaves literally walked away from their plantations, causing panic and outrage among plantation owners.
Most white people believe African Americans lack the proper motivation to work, prompting the provision of Southern segregations to adopt the notorious Black Codes.
States adopted vagrancy laws, which essentially made it a criminal offense not to work and were applied selectively to blacks.
8 of those states enacted convict laws allowing for the hiring out of people in county prisons to plantation owners and private companies.
People trapped in the system were forced to work for little or no pay.
Convicts had no meaningful legal rights at this time.
They were quite literally to be slaves of the state.
13th Amendment to the US Constitution had abolished slavery but allowed one major exception. Slavery remained appropriate as punishment for a crime.
The convict population grew 10 times faster than the general population. Prisoners became younger and blacker, and the length of their sentences soared.
The Civil Rights Act of 1964 formally dismantled the Jim Crow system of discrimination in public accommodations, employment, voting, education, and federally financed activities.
Conservative whites began once again to search for a new racial order that would conform to the needs and constraints of the time.
Barred by law from invoking race explicitly, those committed to racial hierarchy were forced to search for new means of achieving their goals according to the new rules of American democracy.
A new race-neutral language was developed for appealing to old.
In October 1982, President Reagan officially announced his administration's war on drugs.
All the time he declared his new war, less than 2% of American public viewed drugs as the most important issue facing the nation.
The drug war had little to do with public concern about drugs and much to do with public concern about race.
Between 1980 and 1984, FBI anti-drug funding increased from 8 million to 95 million. The Department of Defense anti-drug allocations increased from 33 million in 1981 to over $1 billion in 1991.
Reagan administration launched a media offensive to justify the war on drugs. Central to the media campaign was an effort to sensationalize the emergence of crack cocaine in inner city neighborhoods.
In 1986, Time magazine termed crack to issue of the year.
The president signed the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1986 in law. Among other harsh penalties, the legislation expanded the use of the death penalty and included mandatory minimum sentences for the distribution of cocaine, including far more severe punishment for distribution of crack associated with blacks than powder cocaine associated with whites. As law enforcement budgets exploded, so did prison and jail populations.
Between 1980 and 2000, the number of people incarcerated in our nation's prison and jails soared from roughly 300,000 to more than 2 million. By the end of 2007, more than 7 million Americans, one in every 31 adults, were behind bars, on probation, or on parole.
Those penalties are imposed most often against people who are guilty of non-violent crimes and drug offenses.
Prison population leaped from approximately 350,000 to 2.3 million in such a short period of time due to changes in laws and policies, not changes in crime rates.
Although the majority of illegal drug users and dealers nationwide are white, 3/4 of all the people in prison for drug offenses have been Black or Latino.
In 7 states, African Americans make up 80 to 90% of all those sent to prison for drug charges.
The racial bias inherent in the drug war is a major reason that 1 in every 14 Black men was behind bars in 2006, compared with 1 in 106 white men. For young Black men, the statistics are even worse. 1 in 9 Black men between the ages of 20 and 35 was behind bars in 2006, and far more were under the same form of penal control, such as probation or parole.
Police supervision, monitoring, and harassment are facts of life not only for all those labeled criminals, but for all those who look like criminals. Lynch mobs may be long gone, but the threat of police violence is ever present.
Once a person is labeled a felon, he or she is ushered into a parallel universe in which discrimination, stigma, and exclusion are perfectly legal, and privileges of citizenship, such as voting and jury service, are off limits.
Barred from public housing by law, discriminated against by private landlords, ineligible for food stamps, forced to check the box indicating a felony conviction on employment applications for nearly every job, and denied licenses for a wide range of professions. People whose only crime is drug addiction or possession of a small amount of drugs for recreational use find themselves locked out of the mainstream society and economy permanently.
Criminals are the one social group in America we have permission to hate, like the coloreds in the years following emancipation. Criminals today are deemed a characterless and purposeless people, serving zero collective scorn of contempt.
Today, a criminal freed from prison has scarcely more rights and arguably less respect than a freed slave or a Black person living free in Mississippi at the height of Jim Crow.
The US criminal justice system is a form of racial control. Dear Senator Reid, I am a young student and aspiring activist for the POC community. I am writing this letter with deep dissatisfaction and vexation upon the issue of mass incarceration in the United States.